Welcome, everybody. We are here with Dr. Elise Curry. We're going to talk to you today about owning a practice as a new graduate, why that was a good fit for her, why you should consider it. We'll get started. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Hi, I'm Elise Curry, and I graduated from the University of Waterloo in Canada in 2012. And I spent about 5 years working at a couple of different practices as an associate, both dispensing and non-dispensing. And during that time, I started to feel like I really wanted to have my own practice. So I kind of went through the process of sort of getting that all organized. And then in December of last year, I ended up buying an existing practice from a single doctor who has a full scope dispensing area. And I've been doing that for almost a year now.
Great. So what made you want to own a practice? What was kind of the catalyst there?
I think there was really a few different reasons. When I first graduated optometry school, I just was naturally curious about some of the different things that went on outside of a exam room. So just observing things like how do the owners market their practice, and how do they attract new patients, and what decisions do they make to buy equipment. And I think it was that sort of natural curiosity that got me really interested. And then from there, as I went along, I found that there were certain things I was kind of discontent with, that as an associate, I didn't exactly have a lot of say in how things were being done. And I wanted to be able to have some control and do things the way I wanted to. So I kind of reached that point where I was just ready to take on a new challenge, and thought that it would be kind of good to just go for it.
So what was your first step?
The first step was actually just a lot of preliminary planning and background work. So it took a long time for me to figure out exactly what I wanted to do in terms of whether I wanted to start a practice cold, or buy an existing practice, or join as a partner, and figuring out where I wanted to live and what sort of community and all of those factors. So for me, it was a good 2 years or so of just sort of checking out different opportunities and trying to find something that was the right fit before I was really ready to commit to it.
So you did your research.
I did, yeah. It was one of those things, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty in any of these types of situations, but at the end of the day, you kind of get to that point where you just have to go for it and take that leap of faith. So
yeah. So what was the biggest difference that you saw between just jumping in and opening cold versus purchasing a practice from an established doctor?
Yeah, for my case, I purchased an existing practice, and I think the main benefits for me was just having some of the infrastructure already in place. So having pre-existing staff, having a medical record system that's already set up, having all the equipment there. I think it was really helpful for me to sort of have that, and to have that patient base, because when I started, there was already people coming through the door. I was able to generate revenue right off the bat. I think that was a really nice option for me starting out versus people I know who started out cold. They had a great experience as well, and they got to build everything from scratch. So that's kind of the advantage. If you do your own thing from the beginning, you really get to build it from the beginning versus taking over something that already exists and kind of trying to fit yourself into that.
So how did you approach the doctor? Did you start to work for them? Was it just conversational?
Right. Yeah, in my case, I actually hadn't worked at the clinic previously, so I found out about the clinic being for sale just on our postage board for our Optometry Association. So then I reached out to him, and then we kind of started the whole process of going through the financials, checking out the clinic, checking out the equipment, just doing all your due diligence work and things that sort of happened beforehand, and then got to the point where it was kind of the right fit. So then we just kind of moved forward, got all the legal work and financial stuff in place.
What were some of the questions that you had going into talking to the owning doctor?
Yeah, I had a lot of questions, just trying to understand the demographic of the patients. So I really wanted to know were they seeing children or seniors, or what that looked like. I wanted to just get a sense of kind of the overall feel of the clinic to make sure it was sort of the fit of what I was looking for. And there was all the sort of other side of it where you're looking at the financials and looking at whether it's something that if you buy this, can it be profitable, and what's your sort of financial situation going to look like moving forward from there. So I would say at the end of the day, there was a whole bunch of different factors that you're all kind of evaluating simultaneously. And I don't think there's any sort of like perfect clinic that's out there. So for me, it was, there's certain things maybe I didn't like, but at the end of the day, you have to kind of make some compromises and find something that's the best fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned financials. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that students and new graduates see as a roadblock for them being able to either start a practice or purchase a practice. How did you approach that? How did you kind of get over that mental hurdle?
Yeah, it was definitely a big sort of concern that I had starting out, and I think I sort of started it by thinking about what some of my long-term financial goals would be, whether it's things like owning a house and just sort of pre-planning and budgeting and figuring out how it was going to look with having my own clinic. And definitely in my case, there was like the income that I generated was less than if I had worked as an associate, because starting out, there's not always a lot of free cash at the end of the day. So I just kind of prepared myself for that reality, and then you just kind of move forward and make adjustments and go from there.
Do you think it's a good idea for someone who's considering purchasing or opening to also maybe have a side practice where they can still generate some income as they're building that up, or do you say just dive right in?
I would say in my case, I really wanted to be kind of like all into my clinic, but at the same time, I did want to have that sort of supplemental income. So it's a really individual question, and you have to kind of figure out what's the right fit for you. But at the end of the day, you just have to kind of weigh what makes the most sense. But my general thought process is that sometimes you just have to, dive in. You have to be kind of committed, and just sort of, it's going to be slow at first, but you have to kind of ride it out for a while.
Did you run into any challenges along the way when you were negotiating your deal, or trying to figure out exactly how to make this practice your own?
Yeah, it was definitely challenging at the beginning, just understanding the timeline of how things happen with like the legal and the financial aspects, and then just a lot of uncertainty about, at the end of the day, whether it was going to be the right choice for me. And there's always different unknown variables and things that you're never really going to exactly foresee how it's going to play out. So I think, a lot of it was driven by just like uncertainty and a little bit of hesitation. But it's one of those things, if you keep like asking questions and keep exploring your options, then you can kind of get to a point where you're comfortable with taking that risk and kind of going forward.
What was the timeline? How long did it take you to really, you said you thought about it and kind of planned for it for about 2 years. Once you really started negotiations and found the practice that you liked, how long was that process?
For myself, I would say it was a good 8 or 9 months or so in total, from the time that I originally started talking to the owner to the time that we had finalized our agreement. And part of it was just, the whole legal process and financing and things with summer vacations and coordinating meetings and just all these little factors that all kind of come into play. But it was definitely a long process. I wasn't expecting it to be as long as it was. At the same time, it's not something that happens overnight, but there's a lot of little pieces that all need to fit together at the end of the day.
Did you decide to keep the owning doctor on? Some people do like a phase out kind of situation. Some people do a complete cold cut sell. How did you do yours?
So in my case, it was a complete cold cut sell. So I took it over as the solo doctor, and the old owner, he just was in a position where he didn't really want to be involved with the practice, which in my case, it worked out okay. It was a little overwhelming at times, not having some of that initial like transition and mentorship. People were generally pretty receptive, like in terms of patients with a new patient or with myself as a new doctor being there. But I think, when you kind of take over and you're the only one there, it definitely has its challenges. So in my situation, it would have been nice if they would have maybe stayed on for a period of 2 to 3 months. But there's lots of different scenarios how that would play out.
Kind of dive in head first, huh?
Yeah.
Another thing that I hear from students or from new graduates when they're thinking about this is that they feel like they don't know enough yet to make that plunge. How did you kind of overcome that? And would you say that that's a true fear or something they should just say, I'm good, let's do it?
Right. Yeah, I would definitely say that it's a true fear. And for myself, there was really no kind of point where I felt 100% confident. And I think for myself, I tried to talk to people who had been in that position and people who had been like owners for a long time, and personal friends who had gone through the process who are like a year or two ahead of me. And at the end of the day, though, I was never like 100%, felt like I was 100% confident. So I think it's one of those things you kind of get to a point where you are, and then you just have to take that risk.
Well, it sounds like mentorship is a big part of feeling like you're ready. So can you speak to how important, forming a network and finding someone that you can trust and be your mentor, even if it's not the person that you're buying the practice from, is for our new graduates?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a huge aspect. And I guess one tip I would say is it's really good to talk to people who are at different stages of their career. So for my particular case, I tried to talk to people who had owned a practice for like 20, 30 years to get a sense of, what is that like? But at the same time, I had to realize that, what someone's doing 20 years in is going to be totally different than my reality in my first year. So I really, connected with people who were kind of across the span of where they were with the clinic. I think that's a really key part of it. And then I guess also I think it's nice to have the support of people who are like outside of your industry, because it's easy to get so kind of wrapped in everything and caught up that you also need to have like supportive people that are totally, doing different things and can kind of help you detach from, what's going on, because it can be overwhelming at times.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think especially in the world that we live in now, in our professional world, there's a lot of fear-mongering. There's a lot of doomsday talk for private practice. And, they're not going to be around in 10 years because we've got all these other things going on. Obviously, you don't agree with that, or you wouldn't have bought one, I assume. But what was your motivation to say that that's not going to be the case for me? I don't believe that. How do we overcome that fear that some people have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I guess prior to purchasing the clinic, I was definitely sort of cognizant of the fact that, the landscape of optometry is changing, and there are some things that are definitely positive, but there's also a lot of potential challenges going forward. And I think at the end of the day, I kind of recognize that, maybe it would be a little bit of a slow process, and it was going to take some time to kind of get where I wanted to be. But I think that just my commitment and my motivation was going to help kind of see me through, and by providing the best patient care that I could, I knew that eventually it would kind of grow to the point of where I wanted it to be.
Great. Have there been any companies that you've worked with, or any groups or anything like that you found for some support that's been, helpful in your practice?
Yeah, I was generally quite surprised how receptive a lot of the different suppliers and groups, whether it's my lab reps or my contact lens reps, and other networking that I did with other optometrists in the area, that it's really, if you look for resources, there's really great opportunities for different levels of support. And I think people at different stages of their career, they kind of look at people starting out, and a lot of times they do want to give you that kind of mentorship and that extra help to kind of guide you along, because they know that you are kind of new and it is a lot to take in all at once. So I think if you kind of seek those opportunities, there's definitely ways that you can do that.
Did you run into any pushback from your patients? Did you have any patients who were so used to seeing the older doc that maybe they didn't trust you as much or feel as comfortable?
Yeah, that was definitely one of my major concerns kind of leading up to purchasing the clinic. And I did encounter that on the odd occasion where people were just so attached to their previous doctor that as soon as they found someone else was new, they're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to come here anymore. But I would say that was only the case maybe 10% of the time. And the rest of it, I think people were generally pretty, receptive, or at least willing to give it a try. And I think one of the interesting things is when you take over a clinic, the patients, they do have a lot of trust. So they think that, whoever's here was someone that was kind of vetted by the previous owner. So they are open-minded in a sense to kind of try it out.
What are some of the biggest changes you've made in your practice?
So far, it's been a lot of kind of slow incremental changes, and I found the first 5 to 6 months it was really just kind of getting a handle on the way things were being done at the current time, that I felt like I couldn't really make a lot of changes because I didn't understand the process from the beginning. So I'd say after about the 6 months mark was when I started making some incremental changes, and some of it was just general things like how I wanted to spread out the patient exams and sort of general clinic policies and things regarding warranties, and just trying to be as fair to the patients as possible, but then making decisions that would kind of support the business in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any challenges with the staff? In school, we don't get any training on how to manage a business or how to manage staff, right? So how did you overcome that and really learn how to interact with them?
Right. Yeah, I think the staffing part is definitely really interesting, and you're exactly right that you really don't get a lot of training on how you're supposed to do that. And in my particular case, I was pretty fortunate that the pre-existing staff were able to stay on, and it did make the transition easier for me. And I think my general approach was just to kind of model what I had seen done at previous practices. And I wouldn't say I had a lot of leadership or management experience before, but I had done enough observations of other people that I knew, this is how I want to do things. And I just use that as a benchmark of, this is how you treat your staff. This is kind of the things that you do. And then just following my values to make sure that I did the best job I could as possible.
Yeah, I think you made an excellent point saying you don't go in and start to change things day one. Whether it's management, whether it's buying a practice, whether it's coming in as a new staff member, I think some of the biggest mistakes people make are when they go in and they don't learn where they're at first to know what changes they need to make. They just go in and trails blazing and change everything, and then sometimes not for the better, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great. And another thing I found, I guess in addition to that, is that with the patients, if you did keep things fairly consistent, they were a little more receptive. It made the transition a bit smoother for everyone to just kind of, have it a little more gradual. And I think in the end, it worked out that way.
Great. So what would you say are your biggest tips for a student or a new graduate who thinks they may want to purchase or own a practice at some point in their career?
Yeah, I guess I would say in general, you really want to just take the time to kind of observe. In my case, I worked at different practice modalities to really figure out what was the right fit for me. And I guess I would say kind of don't rush into it necessarily, but keep your opportunities open. And then I guess as we touched on before, finding mentors and people that can give you a sense of whether it's the right fit for you. And then, just keeping an open mind. And when you get to the point that you're, ready to do it, just kind of take that leap of faith and go for it.
Great. Well, congratulations on your practice, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.